think you at least get the ball back. You gotta get a chance to get the ball back.
That's just.
Yeah, give them the ball back, make both teams go for two, and there's some kind of differentiation.
Eventually, they'll get
Or something.
You talked to Tim?
No, I don't know. Last time I talked to him was in Mexico.
I get the regular season, I mean,
Last week.
Yeah, it's when I talked to
but in the
him.
playoffs, we're talking about real implications here. We're talking about, you know, Super Bowl rounds.
That was negative. He was still down there.
Yeah.
Brady did that.
Yeah. I think it makes sense in the regular season, because the game's gotta hit, right? At some point in time, the game's gotta hit. And that's just, you know, if you wanted to win the game, you should have done it, should have been there. In the playoffs, there's real implementation on that.
So it's nice to have like a really.
Some way to make it fair.
Nice, yeah.
Yes, it is.
You recommend
It's
it?
not they have
Yep.
TV constraints in the playoffs anyways.
They do.
No, not really, I mean, if you think about it.
Try to get you lined up with,
In the, you know, regular season game, there's a.
try to get you lined up with the fire department.
After you.
I know, I appreciate that. We obviously didn't want to.
But, yeah, there's nothing.
We'll see how it goes. It was kind of on hold, we're going to get ready to start
Oh, he is?
rediscussing that again.
Let me check.
I don't know if he's struggling. He
There's a
just
lot of
said he's
stuff
trying to
happening
do
now.
what we got.
Okay.
Sure, that's true.
He might be okay, just.
Yeah, all right. Well, we'll
Patrick
we'll
on?
wait
You
for
said he
him.
was gonna attend virtually.
I'm sorry, what?
Is Patrick on yet?
No, he's not on yet. I don't see him. Yeah, we're on. And Bob, I'm gonna go ahead and start the recording, just so I don't forget.
Today's our granddaughter's our baby's. So, their tire blow. So I got out and looked at it when I was there.
Oh, up here.
Get her. I said, no, that's
Yeah, there's Patrick and Tim. Looks like they're on now. Patrick, how's the sound? Are we audible?
Good, sound fine, thanks.
All right, thanks.
That is one thing, is when you're listening,
So he got that fixed.
you can't really hear people that well, but they're talking.
Seems like the sensor causes more problems.
So you're watching the
Yeah.
YouTube stream, and you can't hear the people who are on the GoTo.
Yeah, like Kevin
It
was
was like
like.
$500
Yeah.
to replace the damn tires.
Because that goes through the system. That's good to know, because you don't know that in the room.
Yeah. It's hard to hear. It's like super quiet.
Yeah, Tim, can hear you loud and clear. You hear us? Good, all right.
We were saying that
You can turn it up way, way loud on your computer and just barely have enough to hear.
if you-
And somebody else talks.
Then somebody talks, it's
Drive
like,
around.
Yeah.
okay, so just the meeting that we were
I'm like,
remote,
well, yeah,
Right.
your brakes
I
are-
literally had to pick up my laptop.
Okay.
You know what that sensor, all it is
Should
a
be
little
able
battery in
to fix
there.
that. Let's see.
Battery was bad.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll see what I can do.
Oh, yeah, it charges you an arm and a leg for one to replace it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably never know. Yeah.
Guess you gotta get it across the pond. They do indeed. It's, I didn't say Audi.
Oh, that sounds like that microphone.
He must be.
In Mexico, is that where he is?
Blaming on quarantine.
It's one place to quarantine. My brother and my sister-in-law, they both went to work remote for, they work for the federal government, we have to work remote for a year and a half. He said, well, might as well, they hung out.
Hey, Tim, we're getting a bit of wind noise on your line.
We got to be anywhere.
If you don't mind, I want to go ahead. I can mute you, and then you'll have to unmute if you need to talk.
The only problem is, all
right, sorry about that.
So we had
You say
to,
Tim was online?
He's got little
yeah,
lights
he's
on those
on 8
mute
a.m.
fishers.
in Virginia.
They're one of those for everyone.
Okay.
Just that's what I figured.
Strength again.
Are you ready, Mike?
Yes, ready, thanks.
Good evening. We'd like to welcome everyone to the January 25th DeSoto Planning and Zoning. Roll call.
Manson,
Present.
Garrett,
Present.
Templin,
Present.
Lane,
Present.
Milborn,
Present.
Schultz,
Present.
Fisher,
Here, remotely.
all are present.
Thank you. Under general business, item A, approved planning commission agenda.
Make a motion, we approve the planning commission agenda.
We have a motion.
Second.
Have a second. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Item B, approved minutes of the planning commission meeting held on December 21st, 2021. Everybody read the minutes?
Yes.
Yep.
Motion?
I motion we approve the minutes.
We have a motion.
Second it.
Have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Item C, disclosure of conflict of interest. Do we have any? Seeing none.
None?
Item D, disclosure of outside communications regarding commission business. We had any?
No.
Seeing none. Item 4, call to public. Members of the public who wish to address the planning commission regarding items not on the agenda may do so at this time. Any presentations for information purposes only. No action will be taken, and there is a 4-minute time limit. Do we have anybody that'd like to address the commission? Nobody online?
Nobody online, nope.
Okay, we'll close the call to public. Item number 5, public hearing. Consider text amendment to allow restaurant sales in the M1 zoning district. Brad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you have before you is a continuation of our discussion from the previous meeting regarding restaurant sales in the M1 district. I did go ahead and advertise for public hearing, so we will have to open up a public hearing at some point after staff presentation to take formal comment. I think after our discussion last time, direction was to allow for restaurant sales in the M1 district with a special use permit and also a site plan. So it actually, what I had presented earlier, I think was a little more complicated, allowing it by right. And then I also had a few things that with the table that it probably complicated it better or more, so I appreciate your sort of simplifying things. So what you have before you is really a revision primarily to the table itself, the NAICS table, which removes category 7221, 7222, 7224, and removes the alcohol malt beverage requirement for food service in 722410. And then it adds category 722511, restaurants and other eating places, and 722513, limited service restaurants. I also included in your staff report what those categories are, and they pretty much cover what you would consider restaurants, limited service restaurants, fast food, takeout, casual dining, sandwich shops, pizza shops, delicatessens, all the things that are pretty common in most cities in the United States, certainly here in DeSoto as well. Initially, this whole process was started by Joe Bazzano from Mr. Good Sense. He wants to have restaurant sales, actually more of a delivery type thing in the M1 district that he'd like to have operating out of their facility on Commerce Drive. So with that sort of in mind, when I took a look at our overall code, found some discrepancies, some categories that were no longer recognized by the NAICS, and then after discussion with the Planning Commission came up with this approach as far as revising the accommodations and food services table within the DeSoto City Code, and then also allowing restaurants and limited service restaurants in the M1 district with a special use permit and a site plan. So with that, I think it pretty well boils it down to fairly simple, straightforward, some text changes, and then we would add within our code, a site plan would be required for M1 restaurants. As you can see, that the table is updated accordingly. So with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Brad, if I was gonna do a drive-through before, what would I be under the old classification?
Well, we actually do have that drive-through food service, so you would have been the 7222 line, but if you go back up to the limited service restaurants, it does say fast food restaurants. So in I guess my interpretation, fast food also sort of includes, you know, it's a Burger King, it's a McDonald's, those typically have drive-throughs with them.
So I guess my question is that food services and drinking places, 7221, would that allow you to have a drive-through on it, or do you have to go under 7222 under the old way we had it?
Well, the reason that I struck the 7222 line is because it's no longer part of the NAICS code.
Okay.
So because of that, and once again, the list that's in there, that's just what's in the NAICS. I mean, it is up to staff and ultimately planning commission to sort of interpret that a little bit ourselves as to what we think is appropriate use. Now, that to me, that's what I mean when I say fast food. I'm thinking McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell. Those typically have drive-throughs associated with them. So
My only question is, it looked like drive-throughs were only appropriate in the C2 before, but now maybe they're appropriate in a C1 or a C2. And I don't know if it's an expansion of it, or does it make any difference, or were people previously putting them in C1s anyhow?
well, the C1 districts are downtown districts.
Okay.
So I mean, I could certainly take that, or if you think that would be appropriate to remove there. I don't know how you can do a drive-through in our downtown district. It really is just our downtown area only, so I don't know how it would work necessarily, but maybe that would be a good recommendation to remove the,
Or maybe make it a special use permit down
or
there
you
if
could
somebody
put
wanted
an
to do
S, you could change that,
a Tasty Freeze or
in the
something like that.
C1, you could change that red P to an S if you thought that was appropriate. And that would, of course, be part of your motion to
And that's also the drive-through food service. 7222. Yeah, I would like to see that put in as well.
And I wonder if that same thing should be in C1 there also by a special use permit only for limited service restaurants, as opposed to by just permitted.
Well, the thing about that is if you, I mean, like the pizza place, KJ's, it would be basically require him to get I mean, he's already operating, so he wouldn't have to do it now. But if there was just another restaurant downtown, you'd have to require them to have a special use permit. And I think we've kind of want, at least my interpretation is, we would like to see those types of activities in our downtown district. It would be an additional hoop they would have to jump through.
Okay. So but KJ's wouldn't fit under 722410 for food service?
Well, that one, yeah, that's
How is
kind of
that
a,
different?
yeah, that was primarily for places that do serve alcohol, because some of these, I mean, like, once again, fast food places don't serve alcohol. I think you can, and I've not done it, but I think you can buy bottled beer at KJ's, I'm not certain. So really, that does sort of come into play if they're gonna have some sort of alcohol beverage. And I would, once again, I would typically, I think if there was something like that in downtown, they would probably have, it might be a bar and grill, something along those lines. So maybe it would just fall into 722410. But if you're gonna do that, then maybe, I would just suggest, Roger, maybe changing that limited service, because we really probably don't want to have drive-through restaurants in the downtown district.
So change the 511 to an S under C1, but leave 513 as a P?
Actually, I was thinking maybe the 513, the limited service ones, that includes fast food restaurants.
Yeah. And my thought was put both of those by special use, but
Oh, okay. Well, it's certainly your discretion to make those suggestions. I just don't want to put some sort of burden on a restaurateur that now all of a sudden has to do a special use permit. Because if they don't choose to serve alcohol, we would allow them to serve alcohol, but if they just wanted to be a family restaurant downtown, they would have to get a special use permit. As I
Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
No.
So then, for example, if they had to do that special use permit, what would they have to submit? How would they submit a site plan per se? So it's like they're going in an existing building that has parking downtown. What are you expecting to come in front of this commission?
Well, what we did, and I don't know if you recall this, I don't know if you were probably on the planning commission, but when we approved the automobile sales in the downtown district, we required basically an interior sort of site plan.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of how we viewed that. They would show us their booths and where the kitchen is and all those types of, and if they're going to have a bar or something like that, they would just show those things. And their application would talk about, parking and how that would be handled and those types of issues. So,
Okay, so for M1 zoning, say out there, the Gabriel, if a Burger King or somebody went out there, they would have to follow the M1 zoning setbacks and requirements?
well, that would be where the special use permit would come into, or the site plan would come into.
Yeah,
play.
so, but they'd still
But
have to follow
yes,
those
they would have
setbacks.
to adhere to those regulations.
And then if they didn't like that, then they could rezone to something else.
That's true. And that's kind of one thing we talked about. They could either actually just rezone their tract to a C2 district, or they could go a special use permit process. It's the exact same process. You get an advertisement, public hearing, notification.
Okay, so then it'd be kind of the same example, like if there's an existing building out there, then somebody inside, kind of like Joe Bazone wants to do, they would have to do that own site plan inside the building, like you're talking about.
Correct. And then if they wanted to add, and then we would actually also look at some of the parking requirements, things like that, that might increase or change because they're now adding sort of a retail component to their M1 operation. So we would review all those standards in relation to that particular use of the building.
To me, that's the only reason we're interested is parking and traffic flow and how it's going to impact the rest of the community, which is why I'm kind of thinking, quite frankly, the C1 needs to be protected there because it is unique, and if we've got somebody who's creating a disruption, we have no way to deal with that.
Mhm.
I think the M1, having a special use permit on that seems absolutely appropriate as well. So that's why I'm kind of going that route.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions for Brad? Do you have anything else on this, Brad, that you want to, before we go to a,
No, I think the discussion was good, and I understand exactly how you would like to see this, at least based on our discussion. Ultimately, it's the motion that you make will determine how we change and update the code.
okay, at this time, then we'll open up for a public hearing on this. This time, we will open up the public hearing on this text amendment. Do we have anybody that'd like to address? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Hi, Holly Barth, 37070 West 95th Street. So, don't really have a lot of concerns with this in theory. I guess part of my thought is we already have sort of Taco Bell, McDonald's, Burger King, so it'd be something different from that. I guess this would be a site plan discussion, but I would not want to have some enormous sign sticking up out of the middle of the Gabriel property advertising that there's a, one of the biggest companies in commerce right now. So I would hope that that would be considered or denied, that you're not putting a giant 50-foot Taco Bell sign or Burger King sign to highlight that that's right there off the highway, because I get where it makes sense for Lexington. But from there, I would hope that that would be taken into consideration and or denied. If you can put a bunch of fast food restaurants in the Gabriel property, because you know, a lot of us over there are not happy about what's going in there now. My other question just here at the last minute was, so Flint Development is getting, I mean, tax abatement and no tax on the construction materials and a slew of other incentives to build out there. So if somebody came in and wanted to build a Chuck E. Cheese, would they also be given the same incentives and tax breaks and abatements and what have you to be able to build out there?
Mike, you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, so the incentive package that's contemplated for Flint, it's laid out in a memorandum of understanding the council in November. Talks about light industrial development only on the property, and so that was consistent with their zoning request and all that. Really didn't contemplate any sort of retail food establishment. The impetus for this particular zoning text amendment wasn't them at all. It was actually the Goodson's building, so it really wasn't contemplated. But I would say though that the incentive concept does cover the whole area. And so I don't think it would be out of the policy framework that we've already set to extend those types of incentives to a retail business, but that's really not what's contemplated in the current framework.
So I'm not
So
sure.
the answer is maybe.
That's not great. You understand we're not going to be on board with that. That's not great, because that's just going to feed in that much more traffic and that much more, you know, visual contamination to that area that, you know, it's already going to be there. So at what point would we have any, I mean, I know there's site plans to all these discussions, and when somebody comes in, there's always a site plan discussion of what that would look like. I mean, do we as the community actually have any say, any
Yes.
ability to actually influence any of that?
Well, yeah, so importantly, even though I don't think it wasn't the intended, you know, it wasn't the intent, but having these as a special use permit in M1 does require a public hearing process where neighbors are notified, just kind of like the zoning does.
Right.
If it were just allowed in M1, then it would just be a site plan, and you know, your ability to have that interaction would be diminished. But yeah, under this that we have, if you know, if they want a restaurant to come in somewhere in support of whatever else, it would be a public hearing process. So it goes, yeah.
Okay, so if you keep it as an M1 zoning, don't change it to C1, then we still have a special use permit, and we would still have some sort of,
Yeah.
It would probably be a very similar process if they tried to rezone it to a C1, quite frankly.
would they be?
Or C2, it would be C2
Or
out
C2,
there.
yeah.
Well, if they rezone it to C1 or C2, then why would they be given the same
Well,
tax abatements and what have you with
The
the M1?
issues, same issues would be presented as to whether that's an appropriate use for that property. Those same things didn't come up with this special use.
And the
Mike,
abatement,
if I-
Patrick,
for a
yeah.
moment, this is Patrick Reed, the city attorney. I just wanted to note that for any retail establishment, restaurant, they could not get a tax abatement. So that's just by state statute, they're not permitted a tax abatement. So,
Would they get,
at least for that, that's not something they could get.
would they get the tax break on the construction materials? Potentially? And whatever else they got?
No. No.
We don't pay taxes.
Yeah, the Flint doesn't. Flint won't be, right?
What's being contemplated with the Flint MOU is a process where industrial revenue bonds are issued, and those are, yeah, that would allow for tax exemption on construction materials.
So that would not apply to the fast food or whatever restaurant?
Correct, no, as Patrick just said,
not apply.
and I'd forgotten, statutorily, we cannot offer those types of incentives to a retail business.
Okay, all right. You can answer all my questions, and thank you. One quick question follow-up though, the next item that you have up, will we have, I know it's not a public hearing item, but will we have an opportunity to ask questions around that? And be part of that conversation?
Well, on a public hearing?
No, I'm sorry, on the next item that you have on your agenda, about the architectural, for the big box distribution on tonight's agenda, will we be allowed to comment or question or be part of that dialogue versus just listening?
Well, the only time, see if I get this right, Is it, when you can comment is on a public hearing item, is that right?
Well, certainly on a public hearing item, yes, the public has a right to comment. Otherwise, it's at the discretion of the chair as to whether or not, or how deeply you want the audience to be engaged.
I mean, I read through the agenda and what you have out there. I mean, what's listed right in the agenda today is just current DeSoto code for what a million square foot building would look like and what the, the windows and the structures and the colors and the brick and what have you, what that would look like. And so I'm just asking, there wasn't a proposal as to what you all were envisioning as improvements upon that. It says it'll be brought up for discussion during the meeting tonight. So what I'm asking is, I know it's not a public hearing item, but if I have comments or questions, can I get up and ask those questions and have that be considered as part of your all's decision-making around these potential improvements that you're proposing?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the item that's listed on the agenda that was approved is just a discussion. It's not a public hearing, and no action is taken at that. Now, based upon that discussion, it may come back in the form of a proposed text amendment, at which time we will have a public hearing on that, and there'll be plenty of time to talk about it. So the question of whether or not to take public comment today is, I think, just at the discretion of the chair.
Yeah, we're just, I don't know how to really explain it.
Well, it's customary for us to do anytime, and we started this one like this. It starts with a discussion, some direction from the planning commissioners, if they have questions, concerns, comments, and then we compile that and then bring it back in the form of an amendment change. Now, there's no guarantee of the planning commission, how that discussion is going to go, but typically we don't have a large community discussion at this point.
Okay.
We have information now that we'll present that we sent to the planning commissioners this afternoon that wasn't on the website. It is now public information. Certainly it's your right to have that information, which we will disseminate. And so that's going to kind of form the context of the discussion.
No, because I know, obviously, you all know that the screening was very important to us, and that was sort of a sub-point on the agenda, but just the code information that was listed. It didn't talk about that directly. It talked about the construction materials that had to be used, and it talked about, so much 60% had to be windows and this, that, and the other, and canopies and what have you, and 20% had to be something else. So all I was requesting was, can it be 80%? Can it be, whatever, so that we can minimize the look of just giant warehouse. And if there could be any consideration for that. I understand a public hearing is a more appropriate time to do that, but to me it seems like if we don't even have an opportunity to talk about it when it's first kind of brought up, then you all are going to have your kind of ideas already formed, and by the time it gets to a public hearing point, then not necessarily because you guys went our way last time, but it could, potentially already kind of, that ship has already sailed because you've already decided in your head what, you think that building should look like, buildings should look like. So obviously we don't have a full house tonight, so it wouldn't be hours upon hours. And I don't know if I'm going to have anything else to say. I just was wondering if a question arises about what you all talk about here in this next agenda item, would we be allowed to ask a question, ask for clarification or consideration of something? But I guess it sounds like the answer is no.
Well, this is just basically going to be a fact finding. This is something new for all of us to deal with something like this. So we're just kind of throwing things out right now because till we get our feet on the ground.
Okay.
There's a lot more information, like you said, there's 40-some pages that they're going to present from different municipalities, so you can hear all that information too.
Okay, so that's out,
what we'll be listening to as well.
so that's out there now, or is that going to be out there later?
That's what they're going to send out.
Yeah, we'll put it on the website after this evening.
Okay.
Yeah, you're entitled to have anything that's given to the planning commission as a body or discussed in this meeting.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But there will be a public hearing before you can.
All right.
Yes, yeah.
Rosemary Mail, 37265 West 95th Street. I guess my issue with whatever restaurants or whatever goes over there would be, if you go drive by good old Clint's next logistics building that is not full, it's pretty empty. And kind of look at that as a viewpoint, and then you look at some of the other commercial buildings around. I just, my thing that, you know, living across the street from this, with whatever goes in there, be it restaurants or whatever, of course, no jiggle joints or strip joints, but. I've got somebody that calls them that. But would be those extremely towering lights. Hopefully they could keep their lights below the building level. Because that, I mean, I kind of like my sunsets, and there's so many of us out there, you're going to destroy that for if those buildings end up going in there. I mean, I've been talking to quite a few people in the state, and there's some issues about hopping 6 and 7 zones going on, and that would be part of the issue is the aesthetics or the look of this whole situation. I mean, well, that's the logistics doesn't have near enough landscaping. It looks like crap right now. I don't know what's going in front of it, but those towering lights I've seen on some of the others, that would be terrible. Even if they're back behind the buildings. I mean, there's strips about as long as wide as that telephone pole, or flagpole, and there are all these glaring lights. I mean, it's going to kill us over there. And it's not, you know, I'm hoping you guys will keep in mind the flow of somewhat of ruralness, that maybe you, I know we're going to widen the roads and hopefully put bike paths and sidewalk. I've heard sidewalks, but I haven't heard bike paths. And huge shoulders, but I also know, it sounds like Calvin's doing a bunch of studies on this road. But those glaring lights and the large tall signs and stuff would be my big issue. And hopefully the setbacks, and you're looking at all those aesthetics of the setbacks and screening to be something tall, at least decently tall. I know you can't get, I mean, I'm hoping they're going to be higher than this tall, because that's what I saw people at EXA. And that's all they got planned. Because right now our codes show no screening because of roadway interchanges all the way around that place. So if you could do that, I would extremely appreciate it. It's going to change our world no matter what. So the car and the truck traffic, the beep, 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 is going to be a problem. So I appreciated the special permits on all restaurant situations.
Well, we do pay attention to your complaints, and we will definitely work on it, I guarantee you.
Yeah, that beep, 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 that, I mean, yeah, have you ever, I mean, I'm a realtor. I've sold houses around FedEx. It's an issue. It's an issue for every one of those houses. I know one person that bought 10 acres on it, and they said it doesn't, they were used to living in a little subdivision, so, you know, we're not a little subdivision out there. We take up a lot of land.
Right.
So I just, that's probably one of my big worries is I don't want to have that damn beep, beep, beeping in the middle of the night and have those towering lights destroy all my sunsets for the rest of my life out there. Thank you.
Good evening, Melissa Knoll, 10175 Egerton Road. I just want to first thank you guys for your back and forth and your open dialogue this evening. I do just have a question regarding the special use permit, because I think we some of us found out maybe the hard way that once something is voted in, then legally we're bound to allow it to go through whether we vote yes or no. Given the situation with the golden criteria and so on and so forth with the rezoning. So once we say that restaurants are allowed in the M1 zoning district, we say with a special use permit, but we also say you have to have public hearings and you have to have votes on rezoning, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because the law says that we have to follow through with what we put in the future land use map. So is this going to be the same situation? Like even if we say we have to have a special use permit, does it matter? Do we have to grant that special use permit to everyone that applies for it just because we voted it in? And that's a legit question. I'm just concerned.
Yeah, that is a good question, and there's nuance there.
Okay.
Because if this were just permitted in the zoning district, then the city staff, planning commission, and council will be obligated to allow it as long as it meets all the letter of the code in terms of buffering and site planning and lights and all that. we couldn't just say it's not for the good of the community, so we don't want it. With a special use permit, it's more akin to the zoning. So it's kind of both. You get a site plan application with really the sort of the golden criteria sort of factors that you look at for zoning. So when we put it in here, if it's special use permit, it's not legally a right, a property right to establish a restaurant here. It's something that has to be considered in the context of a larger community discussion like the zoning is. So that is, I mean, is that clear? Does that answer your question? That this, putting this S, special use permit there, takes it out of the category where you're compelled to approve it as long as they meet all the requirements, and puts it into the category where there is some discussion back and forth, and there's public hearing, public input from the property owners, and you can consider these other less objective, more subjective factors in deciding whether you want it or not.
Okay, so if I'm a restaurant owner and I apply for that special use permit, you guys don't necessarily have to approve it. It can actually be taken into consideration.
Yeah,
and there's not.
that's an easy way to put it. And Patrick, do you want to add to that or correct me?
I'm just going to say, definitely, we always recommend that a term be put on any special use permit. We do have, they can be self-renewing, but that's also different than zoning. Generally speaking, a special use permit has a term, like 10 years, 20 years, so, and upon that, permit reaching that term, then the applicant would have to come back before the planning commission and city council to get that extended.
Okay.
Just wanted to add.
Okay, so if somebody comes in and applies for a special use permit and it's for 10 years, then if it's not renewed at 10 years, then that restaurant has to leave the area?
Cannot be used for
That's
that.
Okay. What's the normal time
We
frame?
have a lot that are 5, we have some that are 10, we have some that are 12. Kind of depends on the use.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Do we have anybody else who'd like to make comments tonight? At this time, we'll close the public hearing. Brad, do you have anything else to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not.
How about the commission?
I guess I got a question on the pole sign. Do they have to come in with another application for that pole sign? Or is that just approved with the site plan?
Yeah, a pool sign also is a special use permit process, so we could approve the site plan for a building, but then if they wanted a tall pole sign or pylon sign, that would be an additional permitting process, which would require public hearing and notification.
Anything else? Would entertain a motion?
I would move recommending approval of the text amendment. We're recommending approval, the council has to approve.
Yeah, that's correct.
Recommending approval of the text amendment with the modification that the last 3 categories in C1 districts be special use permit as opposed to permitted.
We have a motion. We have a second. Is there any further discussion? Roll call.
Hanson? Yes. Garrett?
Yes.
Templin?
Yes?
Lane?
Yes.
Milborn?
Yes.
Schultz?
Yes.
Fisher?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, we have no old business, new business. Discuss updating regulations for large box distribution building standards. Brad?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we're starting to go through this process and dealing with the larger distribution buildings that are part of the M1 process, I mean, certainly everybody's seen these buildings going up all over the metro area, and certainly all over the country as well. When we looked at our regulations, they're really not, they're adopted well before tilt-up construction was a real common practice. construction industry has been able to modify, change, make tilt-up construction much more aesthetically pleasing. In our current code, we have some pretty rigid guidelines as far as masonry and glass and awnings. We talk about arcades. I'm not quite sure exactly what that definition is as how to view something along those lines. But we do have these terms that require certain percentages. And so what I did was I looked at Edgerton's code, and then I also looked at Olathe's code. I also went out this weekend and took some pictures of locations around Olathe and then I guess the North Point development in Edgerton. And I did send that information to the planning commissioners, and also you have hard copies in front of you tonight. And really the trend in the industry, the trend in the planning and approval process is to take out some of the rigidity in the code itself, but allowing more broader statements saying buildings need to be aesthetically pleasing, you need to have, it does say you need to have different materials and also different color schemes and relief, but it doesn't require certain percentages, because what people have found, or what I guess people in planning and development on the municipal side have found, that just because you have these rigid guidelines, it doesn't mean you're going to get a better product. So that's what sort of drives some of these things. So when you really look at Olathe's code, it doesn't say anything about specifics as far as it must be 20% mason, it must be 60% glass. Because what in turn has happened is, yeah, developers would do that, but they would use bare bones, cheapest materials possible just to meet that 20% rule or whatever the percentage is. What is happening, the trend now is to allow the flexibility for the architect, developer, to really come up with a design that they think is best suited for their location. It also gives city staff, ourselves, if they just show up with some monolithic concrete slab building, to say, no, we're not even going to consider taking this to the planning commission. Because it does have to meet some of these statements that we talk about that are in our code currently, but what we do have are some fairly rigid guidelines that Edgerton has less of, and that's what's in your packet with the Edgerton LP Logistics Park District, and then Olathe just really has just some fairly generic statements about location, height, things like that, that color building elevations, conceptual zoning stage. Architectural team's plan describe the intent of the scheme, provide some details, focal points, material lighting, and pavement pattern. It doesn't say it has to be certain amounts of amount, but those are the things that we would be looking for, and certainly things that the planning commission here would be looking at as well, saying, is this ultimately an aesthetic and pleasing structure? Does it have some glass? Does it have some awnings? Does it have relief as far as breaking up patterns and rhythms? You spend some time looking at those buildings, and then just a few pictures that I took, I included in the staff report. This building, when I mentioned in the staff report, that building is 1 million square feet. That's in Edgerton. It is 5,000 or 2,000 by 5,000 wide. So it is a pretty large building, but you can see some of those patterns, as you can see the repetitive nature, some of the differences in the colors. Some areas they have used natural lighting. They even use some of those longer, skinnier, are actually the gutters and the downspouts that they painted. That provides some relief and things like that. And I guess relief is a term that architects use. It's really creates some depth onto the building itself. It's not just one big flat surface. And so they can use those types of things. You know, you gotta have drainage, you gotta have gutters. So why not make those gutters and integrate them into the building design, try to make them a little bit better. This building is in Olathe along 167th. And then there's also an elevation. That's sort of the interior side. This is more of the, I guess, the public side. Right across the street is Lone Elm Park. And then this building, the one that's actually on 169 Highway. And so you can see that this is all tilt-up construction, but if you applied our standards to that building, none of these would actually work. There isn't enough glass on this one, even though this one here has the most glass of all the examples out there. So I guess what we're wanting to talk to you about is really dropping some of those rigid numbers, rigid requirements, and putting the burden back on the architect and the developer to bring us something that ultimately we believe meets the feel, character, makes it an aesthetically pleasing structure. I would encourage you to take some time to drive through Edgerton and go through that development. A lot of the buildings are not all similar. And that's the other thing, if you do something rigid, every building down there is going to look the exact same. And that's not what we want either. We don't want them to all be 20% brick and 30% glass. So then they all look the same. And then all the buildings are sort of this bigger, monolithic, sort of boring structure. We're not talking about changing any landscaping codes or setbacks or anything along those lines. This is just totally focused on really just taking out some of the rigidity in our code itself as far as how much glass that needs to be on the building. And really, city staff is your sort of first line of defense as these things come up, because if something that we see, just, Mike and I, as we review these things, it does give us the ability to say, no, try again, bring us something else. We don't have to say, well, darn the luck, I really don't like the way this building looks, but it's got 20% masonry, or it's got this glass, but it really doesn't look very good. So that's kind of where, I guess, the trends are going in this, in dealing with these larger buildings. Because it also, when you look at staff time involved as far as having to calculate every window and every building setback and every doorway and every awning, trying to come up with that percentage, and it'll just really slow our ability or bog our ability down. And I don't know that at the end of the day, the product itself is going to be any better by requiring these rigid requirements. So that's sort of my just introduction to where sort of the, I don't want to say the industry, but regulatory side of these big box buildings are headed. They're trying to give some flexibility to, and they allow the, like I said, the architect and the developer to come up with their own themes, their own plans, but also at least fit into the overall framework of what we're trying to accomplish in DeSoto, as every other community is trying to find, make these buildings aesthetically pleasing as possible, but also find that balancing point that we're not putting something too onerous on the developer, and then also because of the rigid amount of potential building materials, we don't really get what we want either. As we talked about, this is just the opening sort of discussion. I do have, and I did set up a public hearing for our next meeting. Just because we have a public hearing doesn't mean you have to take action on the item. It just means that's the opportunity for the public to comment officially on the record as far as what we're considering. So there'll be certainly more input, more research done on this topic. This was kind of a late add in on to our agenda this night, so that's why it took me today. I did do some more research on the standards for a late bed, and we can look at other communities as well if we want to look at Lenexus standards or Shawnee's. But really, these things seem to be popping up more on the southern part of the metro, along the I-35 corridor, which is Olathe and Edgerton, to a lesser extent Gardner. So those are the areas I've kind of focused on as far as reviewing what other communities are doing. So with that, I'll stand for any questions you have. Comments you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think it's kind of the philosophical question we're dealing with is in terms of prescriptive requirements with the percentages and being rigid there. and the more subjective requirements. And sometimes, in the past, we've struggled with some more of the subjective requirements. There's been some back and forth at Planning Commission with applicants. That it tends to lead that direction. Other communities handle that with architectural review boards that come before the Planning Commission meeting. So there's a number of ways to deal with those. From a staff perspective, if we're understanding of the wishes of the Planning Commission and the community in general, we can guide that discussion so that we don't have these back and forth and takes months and months between Planning Commission and applicant to finally get something right. So it's a struggle that communities everywhere kind of have, because you can have a book 2 feet thick with specific requirements and wind up with a really ugly building at the end of that.
Brad, what's been the average height of these buildings?
Well, it depends, but they're generally 3 to 4 stories, probably 35 to 40 feet. But at some point, there's a diminishing return because, they're in and out. They don't want to be lifting and putting things up high. They're in, out, they're out for delivery, so. But all these buildings, the ones that I've shown you, are pretty typical of that. They're about 35 to 40 feet tall.
Anybody have any comments?
Yeah, so I guess, out of these, the Olathe, Edgerton, which ones do we kind of need to, again, we got this kind of late, but, which ones do we kind of need to study? What are you kind of thinking on your initial review?
Well, and I don't know what your thoughts are on I actually, when I looked at what the developer suggested on I like our regulations. I like the way they're worded. It's just taking out some of those percentages, but not taking out the meat of what we're trying to do. And I would have to compliment a little bit. I don't think they changed sort of the aesthetic nature and trying to strip it so they could just put up some sort of cheap concrete gray building.
I think the main concern going in was a real simple, that the state of the industry practice for these larger scale and light industrial development is tilt wall construction. It's the concrete, the wall's gonna be concrete. And concrete is not an allowed building material in our current regs, right? So
Yes,
that's
this does
really
not
kind of where it
address
started
tilt
and
up
ended,
construction.
honestly. So it might be a very simple, small, few words here and there that we change on our regulation. I think it just really might be as simple as that. It's just these developments and the way they're constructed. And you can see the examples from real life examples, not just what some applicants given us that it might look like. You can see the examples of how it can work.
So is the DeSoto developer suggestions the direction we're leaning towards, or just referencing the other?
That's just, at this point, your reference. For me, it makes it, because I'm so used to reading our code and the way everything flows, that it works pretty well. Because if you look how Olathe has done their code, they really just have sort of a matrix and a chart.
I gotta admit, I don't understand the latest code.
Yeah, it's harder to get through, there's no doubt.
So that's what we should maybe look at, is what you gave us, DeSoto with developer comments, and reference the other ones and see if.
I think that's a
import some of that.
a good way to look at it, Todd.
So their comments are kind of more the subjective
And they're the
direction
ones
that
in
you want to
blue,
go.
Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So they're more the objective direction you're thinking about going is what the developer comments.
I haven't even looked. Just got that today. I haven't.
Yeah, and I've been just reviewing Olathe and Edgerton's since late Friday afternoon, so. So once again, we're not suggesting anything, we're just saying, here's some information, here's the direction that the industry is going. Our previous codes really don't talk about tilt-up construction at all.
Was that what they had? I know one of the large buildings collapsed just recently.
Up in Old North in the tornado again.
Well, I think there was another one that was a little closer. So the structural integrity, will that be considered, is that in here for these tilt walls?
Well, that actually would be more of a building codes issue. This is really just the aesthetic, the architectural type finishes that we're looking at. So The mechanical and the structural engineering that goes into it is still governed by the International Building Code. We're not changing anything there.
But do we have anything in the codes that would designate how strong these walls have to be? Like, and have storm shelters inside them to protect everybody that's gonna be an employee there?
Well, that's certainly getting out of my expertise, John. We can certainly make sure that those things are in there, but I would just imagine that code is pretty thorough. We are in use the 2018 building code,
Yeah.
IBC as I recall, so.
Can you find that out for us?
Yeah, I can ask,
If we're gonna have something like this coming in, I'd prefer it to be as safe as possible, because I don't wanna be on the news for any more bad news.
Any other questions for Brad or Mike?
Well, just listening to what you're talking about, Brad, I mean, I've been through a couple of these. I remember when we did engineered air and we thought about the glass coverage and all that stuff, and it didn't make any sense because they didn't, the glass that's there, I think, is just dummy glass along the side. And so, I mean, there's a point to all of that, but without having some requirement in it, there was nothing to talk about. I mean, if they came and proposed something that had no glass coverage, we could say, well, we don't like it, we don't think it's aesthetically pleasing, but we don't have anything really to hang our hat on. And part of the problem is you're relying on volunteers like us to give that sort of feedback. And I do think some structure is better than nothing. And even though the trend may be that those folks that have their planning commissions filled with architects or an architectural review committee that have people that are qualified to do all that, we don't have that here. So I think we need to have some base level of what we think is generally acceptable. And quite frankly, when if I remember right, when Tim and Joe built where JT's is, we had quite a fight about the specific requirements of the parapets and all the other kinds of things like that. And part of that was we couldn't even have that discussion if we didn't have this. And so we had to have some basis to do that with. And then before we just throw it all out and say, oh, well, let's just say if it looks good to us, then we're good to go. I think we ought to give some real careful consideration before we do.
yeah, well, I guess the point also, Roger, is we're not taking out that they need to have glass or masonry or leaf or color variation or anything like that. That all stays in. It's just, do they have to have 20% glass and 40% awning, those types of things. So we're not saying that they get off the hook by any stretch, because we'll be looking, do you have windows on this? Do you have glass frontage?
My point is, if there's no guidelines on it, we have nothing to go with to kind of deal with that. So we need to have something. And at least the past experience I had with those, it was helpful to have some specifics in the code that you could kind of say, well, this is where you got to start. And if you don't like it, then maybe we can deal with that. But, to me, it was helpful in those situations. Like,
Certainly
for
for
the
staff,
VFW
too.
home.
Yeah, certainly
Like,
for
hell,
staff.
they never did finish that. And, that, there's things that about our code at least give us a basis to do it. So I would be very cautious about throwing it all out.
Yeah, I kind of like our strict codes we have, but I understand where you're coming from on the percentage part of it too.
Do we, Brad, do you have the ability to get Lenexes? I'm just kind of curious
Sure,
of what they've been
absolutely.
doing. There've been a couple of interesting things they've built over there, but I'm not quite sure why. So I'm just curious as to what they're
Yeah,
doing.
I certainly can get a Linexus as well, but I would imagine, I have looked at Linexus code, but it's gonna be similar to like Olathe, where it's kind of hard to follow. It's these texts and tables and.
Well, it may not be instructive, but it'd be helpful to at least look at it.
Yeah.
So I guess, Brad, I flipped through this a couple times. Really, I don't see that they've really struck anything out. They've added stuff
Yeah.
on that. Was that your envision?
Well, some of those are revisions. They want some of those things taken out. And like I said, the percentages were the things that I understood that they didn't.
Okay.
Felt like those were some of the items that were just a little difficult to manage.
Whatever we do, we need to get it right, because these are the people that are gonna have to look at this.
Absolutely right. I mean, we gotta be very sensitive to that. There's no question.
Yeah, well, we all have to look at it. We don't have to look at it, first thing in the morning, but it's all gonna define what DeSoto is and how DeSoto fits within the overall fabric of community, the metro area.
Yeah, I would propose that we take next meeting to have maybe a little bit more focused discussion, everybody have a chance to read these things and think about it. And maybe focus that before you come back with a text amendment that's a public hearing item, because we just got this stuff. And I think it's probably worth spending a little time thinking about it and having at least a discussion about it before we go too far down.
But do you think we can do this in one meeting?
I would think the discussion would be one meeting and then come back with a text amendment to have for a public hearing. That's what I would propose. Is that a reason we need to go quicker?
No, I think we need to take a little bit more time and make sure we got this right.
I would agree.
And
I think we do another discussion after you've had a chance to look at this and maybe add to it, whatever else you want to add to it. So that once I didn't have a lot of time to study this today. So I would say, before we say, let's move to the text amendment, let's maybe get a chance to get a feel for it.
I just don't want to see somebody come in and try to ramrod something through and,
Well, I think what we're talking about are things that would probably be, right now, they could not do a tilt construction building.
Right, yeah,
So
right.
it wouldn't be that it'd get around through. It'd be they can't do what they probably would want to do. So we're trying to find a way to make it so they can do
Right.
it.
We need to make sure it's right, because it's not like we're gonna see one building built.
That's
Right.
We're talking about lots of buildings, and multiple locations, so.
And there's a
we
good
need to make sure
reason.
we get it right.
Yeah.
This needs to be here. Correct.
Yep.
So,
Yep, I would agree.
Good idea. I like that.
All right, so let me ask you, I did go ahead and advertise for a public hearing now. Just because you have a public hearing, you take all the public, but you're not required to take a action that night. But if you would like to wait until we have a little bit more defined, you can certainly push the public hearing to
I like-
the March meeting, but.
I might suggest we go ahead and have the public hearing, and then we don't have this odd case where we have a discussion item that people,
Right.
they wonder if they can give input on.
Keep the public hearing open and then present a text amendment
Yeah.
when we're ready to do it.
Yeah,
What do you think of that, Bob?
kind of gets around the
Pretty good
concern
that
that
way.
minds will be made up before public hearing gets
Yeah.
called.
I don't have any problem with that.
I'm good with that. Yeah, I mean, if we like it, we like it. If we don't, we go to next month.
And you could close the public hearing to the next meeting, or hold it open till the following. Yeah.
Well, you couldn't close the public hearing if you haven't presented the text.
That's true.
You're gonna have to do that anyhow, so I'd say keep it open.
any other questions for Brad or Mike?
And you're gonna send one next out, you said.
Yeah, I'll get that information for next and I'll forward it to you all.
So then next month you'll have all this laid out for us?
Yeah, I'll have a better idea of what, and we'll probably meet with the developer to get some, little bit more clarification, because they just sent us an email with these markups, but I did want to get those to you, and sort of unfettered, without a lot of, so you can see exactly what I'm seeing, what Mike is seeing. I think we can look at their words, their verbiage, and see how it ties into what.
Are any of these here, any of the buildings that they have put together?
No, I did not choose, none of those are buildings that they put together. I guess I didn't want you to feel like I was trying to sell you something that they were doing. This is completely people that were not associated with point development.
Well, I think it's probably also fair to engage the developers at some point.
That's what I was gonna ask, are we getting input from those guys too? You know, because they're gonna put up the building also. I think it'd be fair, if we're gonna take input, we need to open it up for both groups to.
This is a great time to look at it.
Industry in
because
general,
the existing one we have doesn't fit the method of construction they probably will use.
Yeah.
So now is the right time to think about it and put the right restrictions on it and make sure that we're comfortable with it.
And due to the scale of these developments
Yeah.
was not contemplated at the time.
Right.
These put together either.
So,
Let's not rush it.
that was great.
Right. Well, if you don't have anything else, then.
No, I appreciate it. To be continued.
I have moved to table it with the idea that we'll have a public hearing on it and discussion to continue.
That'll be fine.
Yeah, there's no actions needed, but if you want to make that motion.
I just want to have it, make it clear that's what we're talking about.
Okay, we have a motion,
Second.
have a second. Roll call.
Manson,
Yes.
Garrett,
Yes.
Templin,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
Milborn,
Yes.
Schultz,
Yes.
Fisher,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, we will continue this next month. Mike, do you have anything for the commission?
Well, yeah, I did, unless, Brad, you're going to address the joint meeting, we'd like to.
Oh, go right ahead. I am working on some.
Yeah,
verbiage.
so, we would like to get the planning commission together with the city council for a joint meeting, kind of a workshop, sort of a meet and greet, but also, to discuss, the general, the role, the interplay between the planning commission and council, in a format that will kick off a more kind of formal effort on staff's part for some planning commissioner training, onboarding. When you get new planning commissioners, we kind of give them an onboard about what the role is and what our regs do and how it all functions as part of the local government. But I think we need to do a better job, a little more formalized kind of training for that. So I think the first step that the council's asked me to do was arrange a joint meeting between the two groups.
I think it's a great idea.
I do too.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to those people.
Well, you don't have to talk. But you gotta Tim, I didn't hear what you said there, Tim.
Oh, yes, I really want to talk to one council member, really bad, so put a meeting together.
Okay, well, for your consideration then, we'd like to consider a workshop before one of the regular scheduled council meetings in February. So February 3rd or February 17th are those two dates. And we'd propose starting at 6 p.m., so it's the same time, start time, with the council meeting followed. And we might bump the council meeting back to start at 7:30 rather than 7, so it gives us a 90-minute window there. Check your calendars.
I won't be in town on the 17th.
Okay.
Work better for me as
Third
well.
is what's
So
better
the
for me
third?
too.
I'm good on the third.
At this point, I'm not sure if I'm going to be in town or not because I'm going to be going to Western Kansas to pick my daughter up and bring her back. I don't know if it'll be the 3rd or the 4th.
So we'll have that,
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the 4th.
Third.
I'm sorry. Yeah, 3rd. Sorry. Get that marked on your calendar, 6 p.m. And then if something changes with the council, then we'll get the word out and let you know. So that's Thursday after next. So. Very good. Thank you.
Brad, do you have anything else?
Oh, I appreciate your comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank the audience for coming up tonight and voicing your opinion.
I had a question I can ask.
What's that?
When's those IRBs going to come up for discussion?
I can't hardly hear you.
The IRBs, do those come up for approval at some point?
You'd have to talk to Mike about that.
Yeah.
That's a council deal.
We don't have a schedule for that yet. So what we have on the incentive package for Flint particularly, we have a similar one at Sunflower. The next step would be a master development agreement. So we haven't gone through that process yet, but
Is that
it's.
going to show site plans?
I'm sorry.
Will that show site plans?
No.
Do we have any site plans at this point?
No, we don't. There's not been a site plan submitted. No. But the IRB would be, about halfway through that process. If I had to guess, it'd be March, sometime in March, that the incentive package will be formalized and then IRBs will be considered after that. So I don't have a specific answer for you, but it'll be at least a couple months before the formalized incentive package gets acted on.
So they close on that property beforehand or after? Or?
Yeah, the closing will happen prior to the incentive package being formalized.
So if they don't, for some reason, get the incentive package, they can still go do it, even though they close, or
Sure.
even though they close?
Yeah.
that, I mean, they can afford to do it.
I don't have any idea if they can afford to, but certainly there's nothing to stop them from developing without an incentive.
All right, well, I guess, are we adjourned or?
Well, we haven't had that motion
Oh,
yet.
okay.
Motion to adjourn,
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
have a motion,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Thank you, Tim. I'm gonna end the meeting now.
See you later. Thank you guys for showing up tonight.
Thank you,
Hope
guys.
you continue to come back.
We absolutely
We
will.
usually have nobody.
Glad we can make it interesting for you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.